Hello and welcome. I am live from Pellam's Wasteland, and today I have another episode of Pellam's Wasteland Reads for you all. This time it is the first Heroes, which is edited by Harry Turtledove and Noreen Doyle. I've read a fair bit of Harry Turtledove over the years, but I don't think I've read anything else from Noreen Doyle. Sorry, I if I sound a little different, I'm actually on a new computer setup now. So I had to reset up everything and totally rebuild all my OBS stuff, which is not that complicated here. But anyway, the first here is basically what I'm saying is that if I sound unusual, sound worse, let me know in the comments and I will try to tinker with it and see if I can't get myself sounding better. But hopefully, this will work out just fine to continue this Pellam's Wasteland stuff that I have been doing. Anyway, the first Heroes is an anthology of short stories. It is, I don't remember exactly how many, and I didn't write it down because I am foolish. Um, oh well. But it's all about the Bronze Age, basically, and specifically a sort of kind of mythic version of the Bronze Age in a lot of cases. There's a fair bit of very kind of clear mythological influence. So there's one, although there's some stories, I say that there are some stories that do a sort of kind of the truth behind the myth version. So, like, there's one story that's about a Hittite scholar or a scribe, I guess, who has been sent to pay attention to what's going on in the kingdom of Wulusia, which is turns into Ilion, which turns into it's where we get the word Iliad from. Um, Basically, the area around Troy, which is sort of maybe subject to the Hittite king, but not quite necessarily. There's sort of a somewhere kind of between a direct holding and a feudal ally, if that makes sense, and are under attack by the Achaeans. And so this Hittite character is sort of witness to what is happening at the war in Troy. And so that's a very kind of grounded historical story. But then we have others. So, like, the one from Harry Turtledove himself is a sort of version of Bronze Age, essentially prehistory, because they don't seem to have any writing, but Bronze Age prehistory in which Europe, basically Europe and the Mediterranean basin, is populated by all of these mythological human hybrids. So we follow a group of centaurs is the main group, but then there are also sirens and fauns and satyrs and all of these other different kind of mythological creatures that are sort of similar to humans. And then the story is about an encounter with recognizably kind of complete non-hybridized humans. And so that's kind of the basis of the story is kind of these characters sort of coming to terms with thinking about the nature of their own existence through that lens, which is kind of interesting. But then we have some others. So there's a story that I can't remember the author, that is about bells in Bronze Age China, and I like that story a lot. A lot of it is basically about this. It's a craftsman's apprentice and the craftsman himself who have been commissioned to make all of these war bells, these great bronze bells carried on carts to make music, specifically to make music in order to defeat enemy armies. Is the idea that they're these bells are supposed to be kind of played at the center of the army, which is a neat element. It's kind of a neat way to get into that particular flavor of the world, and that's one of the more historical ones. And then, like I said, it's kind of a blend of the much more kind of grounded historical stuff, some of the mythic stuff. So there's another a poem, a kind of a longer narrative poem that is about the mythology of the Myrmidons, which appear in the Iliad as the troops that Achilles leads. But there's also other material that apparently the name comes from the Greek name for ant, and there's a myth that basically they are ants turned human, and that's what this particular narrative poem is about, which is pretty fun. And then there's, I guess, kind of bookending the collection. There's two stories that are sort of sci-fi, although they're kind of in the sci-fi stories that are not textured like sci-fi. They just kind of have sci-fi stuff going on in them. And the first is by Gene Wolfe, and that story is really fun. It's a character from our own future who has been sent back into the past, and has missed his mark accidentally and ends up with Jason and the Argonauts, and is sort of involved in their adventures, getting into trouble with them and all that sort of stuff. So that one is really fun. And then the last one is maybe one of the best stories in the whole collection. Seems like it's a classic thing to put your top stories at either end. Um, the best stories at the front so that people will keep reading, and the best stories at the back so that they kind of finish on a high note, that sort of thing. But the last story is by Poul Anderson, and it is basically about the end of the Bronze Age, and the beginning of the Iron Age, which is of course a major historical shift in real history, but it is from the perspective of a modern man who is an archaeologist by profession, has a an academic background in the period of especially the Scandinavian Bronze Age is what he talks about, and so wants to get sent back through this weird machine that works sort of like an animus in the Assassin's Creed series, in that it sends you back into the memories of your ancestors, is the idea, which I thought was a funny detail because it's the story is from several years before even the first Assassin's Creed game. I think the book apparently was first published in 2004, according to Goodreads. So and Paul Anderson died in like 2001 or 2002, I think. I don't remember exactly. Um, anyway, so this is a sort of sci-fi story that is only a little bit sci-fi in the sense of kind of the frame narrative, but the frame narrative is really important here because, of course, as an archaeologist, our frame narrator has a real understanding of the implications of everything that's happening in a way that the characters living through these events do not. And that's really what the story at its core is about, is that one of the things about bronze working is that bronze obviously is an alloy of copper and tin. Copper not particularly common, and tin even less so, which means that there is not that much access to metal, and that metal is a prized possession, and also that if you live somewhere that doesn't have very much copper or tin, you have to trade for it. So in this case, talking about the Bronze Age in Scandinavia, that they have some copper deposits, but really not much access to tin at all, and that this fosters trade with the continent, basically. That in order to have these metal implements, and especially the metal weapons, they have to engage with some amount of peaceful back and forth with the other peoples of Bronze Age or the beginnings of Iron Age Europe. And then they the story involves sort of a exploratory trip, seemingly up the Rhine, although it's never specifically stated, but it seems like based on the geography that that's probably what is meant. Um, in order to figure out kind of why they have been having trouble getting tin that they need. And then, of course, they run into early Iron Age Celts who then, specifically, there's a captive who is taken who knows about how working iron works. And the kind of climactic moment of the story is revealing that this captive has shared his secrets, and that the Iron Age, in its most kind of infantile moments, has just begun for Bronze Age Scandinavia, and that therefore part of the point is that iron is very, very plentiful. Good quality iron, not quite so much, but relative to the difficulty of getting copper and tin for bronze, iron is so plentiful that it becomes really cheap to make iron tools, and especially weapons. And so that this is sort of, from the perspective of this archaeologist, the sort of beginning of the end, basically, that this is the end of the golden age for this very trade oriented civilization that kind of had to engage peacefully with their neighbors because of strategic resource limitations, who now are able to be kind of self sufficient in a way that allows for military conquest, and all of the things that we know about Iron Age warfare and violence and all of that sort of stuff. And so, even though none of the characters living through these events necessarily are aware of the implications of this, that for the archaeologist, this is a very kind of bittersweet thing to witness, the kind of paired sort of progressivist development of civilization alongside a very kind of non-progressivist, I guess maybe accelerationist even, expectations of the implicit violence and terror that is attendant upon this particular technological development. Um, which is why the story is fun to read, because it really does a good job of this blend of influences, and a character who is not necessarily totally sold either one way or the other, but it does definitely have this kind of bittersweet reaction. Anyway, which I guess that's the place to leave it. The collection, like most short story anthologies, I would say is a little uneven. It's fair to say there's some stories that I liked a lot. There are some stories that I didn't like as much. I think there are some stories that I definitely appreciated what was going on and why they were written, but that I didn't necessarily feel like as executed there on their story concept. There's one story in particular that I feel very ambivalent about, because on some level I really liked a lot of the concepts of the story, and there are a number of things that I liked about it, but the actual execution I felt like kind of lacked. And also, it does, I don't know if annoy me is the right word, but it seems very, I guess, uh, it's kind of um, surprising and unexpected, and not in a good way, that it is a story that is sort of about the Bronze Age, but it is really mostly about 9/11, which is kind of an odd inclusion in this sort of thing, even though there is a fair bit of kind of Bronze Age stuff going on in it. And it's not really a bad story, it's just kind of in an odd place where I wish it was better, if that makes sense. Um, but I digress. I don't know. I also think that there's a whole discussion about the Iliad and the Odyssey in that one, and I don't think that the characters actually know very much or are that familiar with the Iliad and the Odyssey, despite one of the characters reading the Iliad to his daughter at night as their bedtime story, and that basically their conclusions about the Iliad and the Odyssey, I think, are fundamentally wrong. But that's sort of a very nitpicky thing in there. So anyway, I don't know. But yeah, the collection is pretty good. I think you can get. I got a digital copy, and if I remember, it was very cheap. Um, so if you are interested in this kind of story or stories specifically about the Bronze Age, then this might be worth checking out. I don't know. I kind of feel bad because I feel like I'm not going to say that much positive about it, even though some of the stories I really liked. The Paul Anderson story at the end, and then the Gene Wolfe story at the beginning, both really good. And a number of the stories in the middle have some really good elements. Or there's one story that's about the Inca civilization that's really interesting, that sort of blends mythology and the sort of real world details of this piece of history, and also this kind of really interesting sort of historical perspective, for lack of a better term, that kind of goes hand in hand with the mythology. Um, so it's, I don't know, there's definitely enough good stories in here. I would say that it is worth checking out if the subject matter sounds interesting to you. Um, but also, I probably wouldn't say that this is the best collection of short stories that I've ever read, which I guess is damning with faint praise, but oh well. It's pretty good. It's probably worth reading, even if you don't like everything in here. Anyway, so that was the first Heroes, New Tales of the Bronze Age. Like I said, pretty good, worth checking out. Um, I am probably going to do, I've been thinking about doing a favorites from 2024 video also. And I don't know if I'm going to do that right away or if I'm going to wait a little longer, because obviously the thing that I always kind of feel weird about with a kind of year end capping thing is that if the year isn't actually over, right, I'm still going to read, even though there's not that many days left in the year. I'm probably going to finish at least another book or two, maybe more than that. And so if any of those are really, really good, then those ought to go on the favorites, surely. So I don't know. We'll see. But I do think I'm going to do a favorites, a Pellam's Wasteland reads that's just sort of favorites from the year. And otherwise, I'm going to keep doing this sort of thing. So, yeah, stay on the lookout for that. Otherwise, I've been live from Pelham's Wasteland, and I will see you next time. Happy reading, everybody.